Here I've got a Retina-Curtagon 35mm f2.8 lens. This is to suit a Retina Reflex S 3 or 4 or a Retina IIIS rangefinder camera. This has come here with the camera for service, and the most notable feature here is that the focus is quite stiff. So this lens really needs to come apart for servicing. I'm just checking the action of the depth of field pointers here. The spring is very strong, but they're a little bit stiff to move. The aperture's snappy. That would work well in a Retina Reflex from that point of view. It doesn't need to be snappy with a Retina IIIS rangefinder camera because it remains stopped down to the set aperture at any given time. Alright, so this has got to be taken apart. I need to remove the lens capsule from the mount, and the way in with this particular camera is we need to unscrew this name ring here. It's threaded in, and frequently it's reluctant to move, and a little bit of solvent is needed around the edge there to dribble down into the thread and loosen it. So I'll start with a friction tool. You can see this friction tool here. You'll notice that it's hollowed out in the centre so that gives good clearance on the glass lens surface, of course, and only the edge binds against the mount. So we'll have a quick turn and see if it moves easily. No, it's not shifting at all, so I'll try a couple of drops of solvent. Well, I've applied a couple of drops of acetone around the threaded area at the edge there, and hopefully that'll loosen it up. We'll see. No, I'm getting absolutely no movement there. Okay, stronger forces required. And here is the secret. I've mounted the lens on the body of a camera I have sitting here. This is one waiting to be serviced. I can put plenty of pressure on that, and by rotating it, the name ring came free. So I can unscrew the name ring, that should lift out. Alright, now I can see that the whole front group there has come loose with that by the looks of it. It has indeed. So that would have been the next trick, would have been to unscrew the front group, which would allow this ring to come loose. But that's all happened nicely for me. That's very convenient. Let's take that back off the body and have a look at what we've got. Well, I'll remove the rear group because we don't need that in there either. So a friction tool again. And I can pop my glass lens groups to one side, and I've got the body here of the lens. So from here on in, it's just like servicing a 50mm lens for all practical purposes. So I will start here. We have 3 screws with washers. They hold our focus scale ring here, they hold the lens capsule into it. With those 3 screws loosened, pop them to one side. The lens capsule should lift out of that body. Yeah, it does. So there's our lens capsule. our focusing thread here, focusing helical. That grease is very sticky and dirty, bit of crap grit in there too. The diaphragm is nice and snappy and requires no work at all. We'll pop that to one side. Here we have the main mechanism, the main body if you like. It has the focus adjust here and our depth of field pointers. So we start here from the back. Four screws. And this is where it gets messy. You need to take note of what went where and what went on top of what. So we take our four screws. They're longer than the screws that were in the front. And loosen that back piece. So here we have the back piece, the mount that bayonets to the camera. Here we have the rangefinder coupling. That's quite stiff in this case. That needs to be pulled apart and cleaned. That couples to the rangefinder in a 3S camera. Underneath here we have this control ring here. Next we have this shim. Now that's, note which colour that is. It's brown, it's brass side down to the lens, grey side up. We can lift off this control ring here and its spring. Below that we have our first depth of field pointer, or in fact the second when we're assembling it. The little coupling cam here that went underneath that. The separator which separates the two depth of field pointers. I'll unhook the spring from this depth of field pointer and lift that pointer out. It's got a little hook on that one where it couples to that spring. Now the spring, if I can get that to come off, I'll take it off because it's easily damaged and I'd rather it was off out of harm's way. If it doesn't want to come off, I'll leave it exactly where it is and work around it. Yeah, it did come off, that's good. There are those two springs in this lens. That one I've just taken off, the one that was fixed to that post and couples to our first depth of field pointer. That was the finer spring. The heavier spring went on the other piece. So now what have we got here? Well, we've got 4 tabs that hold our focus scale ring to the mount. So I will loosen 3 of those with plain screws on them. And the one over here that forms the post for that spring, I'll leave that alone because it's awkward to get back in place. We only need 3 of them out in order to do this. Get those 3 pieces out. So we're going to have 3 wedges and 3 screws there. And these parts are, this is all pretty much stripped down now as far as this is concerned. And these components I've got to clean up. So what I want to do is get rid of all the old grit and dust and dirt. Well, I'll start here. This is the main section, if you like. This is the piece that everything is built up to. So what I'm doing here is just using some naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, on a cotton bud and swabbing all those surfaces to remove all traces of old grease and dirt. And I'll just use a brush to brush out the dust that's around the back of that little brass piece. That forms a separator there to the spring to run around. Just looking at the state of that, it looks pretty clean. I'll give it another wipe. The lens components here are all anodized aluminium. Anodized aluminium has a very hard surface to it, but it can gall up if you get a bit of grit or something in there. It'll have a high friction and it'll be rough. That piece is nice and clean now. I'm happy with that. I'll pop that to one side. And here we have the focus scale ring. And I'm removing the old grease and dirt from that, and I can see that that is quite stained with the old grease. And I'm cleaning out the front here. The front, of course, is fairly open to dust ingress from the 50 or 60 years of time that this camera has been used. Of course, these lenses never had rear lens caps. They were usually fitted into a bubble case, which was a cumbersome thing to carry in your gadget bag, so often it was out of the gadget bag and the loose lens was lying around loose, so they were open to the dust and dirt, particularly from the back, even if people had bothered to fit a front lens cap, which of course is not always the case. Right, so that piece looks nice and clean, and we can pop that to one side. Now I've got my 3 little green wedges here, brass. They're covered in some green low friction material, which I presume was some predecessor to Teflon. And I'm just making sure I've got these clean. Likewise, I'm cleaning those 3 screws. The other wedge, of course, we left in place over here. Now I want to reassemble these components. I start here by taking one of those wedges and sliding it underneath that brass rail, because otherwise we'll never be able to get the thing fitted. Push it back well out of the way. Now, taking this central lens piece here, I want to just put a little bit of molybdenum paste on that. And I'm interested in that groove around there that those wedges run in, and I just need to put a little wipe in there so that they don't gall up onto that aluminium. Now we can fit this together. You need to make sure that the numbers for your focus scale ring there come up to the pointer mark on the mount. Otherwise you're trying to put it back in the wrong position and it won't go well. So I'm just going to lift this piece over the top and hook that little green wedge into place. Of course, I'm trying to lift it in the wrong place, just as I told you not to do. That's better. So that's sitting down in place there. That's running nice and smooth. We'll take another one of our green wedges, and I'm fitting it opposite that fixed pin there. Run the screw in there. Of course you can't see any of that because I've got my fat fingers in the way. I'll run the screw in, just doing that up lightly. And I'll check that that wedge is pressed in reasonably well, just very lightly. And do that screw up and check the movement. Make sure it's still nice and smooth, no binding. Then I'm going to check for rattle to make sure that there's not too much play there. There shouldn't be any rattle as I flex these components across those 2 points. That feels good, so I'm doing up that screw tight and checking the action again. I can feel a little bit of roughness there. I'm just going to back that screw off slightly. Loosen that screw, just back that wedge off very slightly. And try again. That feels alright. So we have one wedge here sitting loose under that brass rail, so I'll pop its screw in place. And what we're trying to achieve here is seeing that our central piece, our focus scale ring, is centered in the mount. If it's all over one side, it'll be rubbing on there and it won't move smoothly. We need it to move smoothly. It's got to be centered. I'll pop the other little wedge in place. Do that screw up lightly and check the action again. There's a rough patch in that somewhere. I'll just slacken that screw off. I'll do the same on this one. All I'm doing, I'm slacking the screw off and I'll pull the lens across, which will push the wedge back. That feels good. Now I'm checking for rattle. If I've got rattle, it means that the wedges are not pushed in far enough. And you can check which pair of them are loose if there is any rattle. That feels good. So I'll just tighten my 4 screws up, or 3 of them, because we never loosened this one over here. That's good. That moves nice and smoothly. That's all I need it to do. So I've got to start cleaning the other components up. Right, with some naphtha, I'll just clean this component. That shouldn't have any lubricant on it at all to speak of. It should just be nice and clean. And this we can pop into place. It sits in here and couples to the gear. It falls down to the lower level. That's good. And its return spring, which was the finer of the 2 springs. And it's made a break for freedom, has it? Here it is. Got to get this fitted back over that post. And since it was reluctant to come off, it's probably just as reluctant to go back on. Now it's on. I'll just swing that to one side for the moment. Take our separator. This spacer keeps the rings apart so that they're not rubbing on each other as they counter rotate. So I'll just clean that. And I'll put that into place. Now there's a little notch in the brass ring at this place that locates with this notch here, and this cutaway section goes past those gears. So that fits on there like that. And our spring needs to be hooked up to our pointer. So I have to carefully stretch that out and hook it over that pointer, and that spring runs around the edge of that separator. Now I didn't have that spring as well hooked as I thought. This is where you need eyes about 40 years younger than mine. That's better. Next component. We've got two components to go in now. One is our small cam. And then our second pointer. So I'll clean this all up. Our cam we have to lift in first. This is quite marked there. I'm not sure what those marks are. They're not coming off. Our small cam. This shifts in position and it runs round in this groove here. I'm just putting a little bit of molybdenum paste down that groove so that the cam will run smoothly down there, and the pin of the cam pops in down there. The separator just tried to jump out of place. The cam sits there like that. Our depth of field pointer, the slot in the depth of field pointer here runs across the top of this little pin on that cam there. And we have to make sure that our pointers are timed together correctly. We've got to shift this around on the gear at this point. Couple of teeth. That's hard against its, the bottom one is hard against its stop over here. Let's see if we can get another tooth worth movement here. No, I don't seem to be able to. Try that again. No. So there I've got both count pointers effectively out at their limits. And now the next component. This ring couples to the cam. It has the return spring on it. And it has a tab which comes out the back of the lens to couple to the camera. So I'm dropping that pin into position on that little cam. The spring needs to be fitted over that spring post the other spring was fitted to. Here we go. And that spring runs round the outside of that brass separator ring there. So far, so good. I'm going to pop that assembly to one side at this stage because we're not ready to put the rest of it back together. These two components I'll clean. You can see that there's a fair bit of dirt on there. I want to get these surfaces nice and clean. This piece is just a shim. Because it's open, it's pretty delicate. Be careful not to stretch it, otherwise it's a bugger to get it back in position. Those I'll pop to one side. We need to clean up this piece, the lens mount part of it. 3 screws hold these 3 tabs down, and the 3 tabs in turn hold the brass rangefinder coupling cam in place. Just tip that lot out. Same deal as always, naphtha, cotton bud. Want to clean out any old dust and grit. I'll take the opportunity to do the outside of that lens mount at the same time. Just blow that out, and I'll take a toothpick. Just run it around the inside of that recess. Make sure there's no grit or anything loose in there. That will shift as soon as we turn our back and jam something up. Now that looks good. The cam. Now this is quite rough at the back. I can see that there's a little bit of roughness, corrosion probably, right at this point here. It's been splashed, I would say. Some moisture's got on there. I'll probably want to clean that up slightly, make that, otherwise it just, the focus may feel rough because we have to move the depth of this rangefinder coupling cam as the focus moves, and because the cam has to push against the pin on the rangefinder, if that surface is rough there, as it is, it will feel rough as it runs across the pin for the rangefinder coupling, and that will make the focus action feel rough. Yeah, I'm certainly going to have to clean that. I'm just cleaning my little 3 tabs that hold that thing in place. They don't really require an awful lot. I'll pop those with their 3 screws to one side. And the mount, and I need to focus my attention on this piece and clean it up. Alright, this little patch of corrosion. I'm scraping that with the tip of a screwdriver to take the crusty lumps off. That moved very easily. I'll do the same with the inside edge here, where there's obviously corrosion. That's coming off. It's like salt almost. It's white. And the outside edge, there's not really any noticeable stuff there. I'll wipe that down with naphtha and have a look at it. I'll take a toothpick and I'll run it across the surface, and I can notice roughness. It certainly feels rough. The cam surface on the top actually feels quite good. Now I've got some 600 grit wet and dry here. I'll just run it down that surface. just to take those marks off. That looks good. And I'll do the same for that inside edge. If I can get it to run in there nicely. That's good. Right, I'll clean that surface up. It's still stained at this point, but the roughness is gone. That should be good.